Welcome to Crash Concepts, where the economy, energy, and the environment are explored. Up next, fresh ideas and insights into the factors that are driving the world and shaping your future. Presenting information you can't afford to live without, here's Chris Martenson.
Hello, and welcome to another ChrisMartenson.com podcast. I am your host, of course, Chris Martenson, and today I'm really looking forward to today's podcast. While every generation feels its own time is extraordinary, and perhaps each time in history is unique, we today are facing a set of predicaments unlike any faced before. Never has humanity been so far out past the edge of the Earth's carrying capacity. Never have we faced a globe without appreciable new resource horizons to cross over and exploit. And never has humanity had to envision a better future while moving away from a high-density energy fuel source, like oil, and towards a more diffuse energy source, such as the sun or the wind. All of this is shorthand for the idea that there's something wrong about our current national and even global narrative that's out of alignment with the facts and data that we can really easily access today, and perhaps even with our own internal compasses that let us know there's much more to being a fully alive and conscious human than our culture typically encourages. Here to talk with us about where we are in this story and where we're headed, and the joys and pitfalls we might expect to find along the way, is Charles Eisenstein, lecturer and the author of the books The Ascent of Humanity and Sacred Economics. I'm very excited to have Charles as our guest today because he writes beautifully on an area that I find very few have been able to or willing to explore openly, which is the intersection between economics and philosophy. Today we're going to explore his thinking on the shortcomings of our current monetary system and why he sees us at an important juncture where, should we want to, we have the opportunity to transition to one more authentic with the laws of nature and the post-peak oil future we're likely headed towards. I'm not sure where we'll end up in this conversation, but I do predict it's going to be a very interesting ride. Charles, welcome. I'm so glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
Can we begin? Let's begin by characterizing the predicament in which we find ourselves. I've said something's wrong with our narrative, and there are a lot of pieces to that. A central one that can prove to be highly disruptive is when a culture's money system breaks down. I loved what you wrote about money as a sacred object and that our high priests and priestesses of money are in danger of being revealed as powerless frauds. Can you please paint for us your picture of how money operates and why it's failing now?
Yeah, I think everybody has a sense that the failure of money is an expression of the failure of something even deeper. So money might not be the deepest thing that's failing, but certainly it's pretty central to everything else that's going on. But where I see, we talk a lot about peak resource use, or maybe even more relevant, peak environmental degradation. But I think that underneath all of that, the failure is of the basic mythology of our culture that money is an expression of. So you could even say that we're under peak, we're going through peak separation, where the kind of money that we have today pushes us into competition, whether we want to be there or not, because of the way that it's created and circulated as interest-bearing debt, so that there's always more debt than there is money. Everybody's competing for not enough money, and it kind of makes into the truth something that isn't fundamentally true, which is the kind of Cartesian version of the self, that we're these kind of bubbles of psychology competing with each other in an external universe for never enough. And the money system reifies that and drags us into that way of being. And it also necessitates economic growth, because if there's always more debt than there is money, the only way the debts can be paid what has to happen is either that lots and lots of people go bankrupt and default and the whole system falls apart, or you have to create even more money to pay the debts that were created from creating the existing money. As you and your readers all know, maybe even better than I do, how this works. And that can only continue as long as there's a basis for creating new money. But basically, and I can get into that a little bit more, but basically what's happening is that our money system is deeply implicated in separation and growth. And both of these have reached their extreme. Therefore, money is not working anymore.
Well, and money is certainly breaking down. I love the image you gave us before of how our high priest, Ben Bernanke, is up and he's doing his rain dance, right? And he pours trillions of dollars into the landscape. And what's supposed to happen next is an economic revival. And it doesn't happen. So what we take from that is, looks like our priest, his magic is gone. And indeed, it is gone. From my point of reference, I think that, once you've hit where we are in the energy cycle and, we're getting less and less high net energy back, it is just an absolute guaranteed prediction that you're going to get less and less economic activity, regardless of what you do with the monetary policy, whether it's tight or loose or all of that. Right. Ultimately, the real driver of economic activity is not money itself. It's real goods and services that people actually need and want and are going to consume going from point A to point B. And energy is just sand in the transmission of that as it's rising in price. So through that framework, we can see that that's an enormous structural shift, and it goes so far beyond that. Of course, the money system is breaking down. Europe's discovering that right now. We were going to hit a mathematical limit with our debt expansion, which is about 4 decades in the making. That was going to happen anyway, but we happen to have this whole peak oil thing happening at the same time. Plus, other resources are getting tight. We've had global food supplies and aquifers, and we're looking at certain minerals, and there's just enough warning signs there to have any prudent person could look at this and say, "Gosh, this is a new landscape." And yet, my perception is that our current cultural and political leadership is just so far away from understanding that the game has changed. That my personal assessment is that what they're going to do is continue to perpetuate the status quo as long as possible until it's painfully obvious that we can't do that anymore. And by painfully obvious, I mean reality has somehow prevented us from going any further. Our liver gave out. That's it.
Yeah.
We're all done in our time as alcoholics. So, from your writings and from your perspective, what is going on here? How can people like you and I and thousands, if not millions of other very intelligent, well-meaning people look at all of this data and go, "Oh, look at this. Something really has to change here. This is serious." And yet we find this gap between what we're seeing in the data and what we're receiving as messages and as cultural conditioning messages from everything around us, in essence. What is going on here?
Well, I think you're right that the power elite is very much trapped in their obsolete paradigms across the political spectrum. Everyone's solution is we've got to reignite economic growth. So when housing starts rise, that's trumpeted as great news. No one really bothers to mention that we already have double the housing capacity per capita that we did in the 1950s. There's something like 19 million vacant units. Mm-hmm. But, as long as we're starting to build new houses, then that's going to be employment, and everything's going to be okay. So they're trying to squeeze a little bit more growth out of the system. But as you mentioned, it comes at a higher and higher cost. And it is very much like an alcoholic, where in the early days, you can maintain the addiction quite easily. You can, maybe you'll have to take a second mortgage on your house, you'll have to lie to your boss a little bit, but you can kind of hold things together. But then eventually things fall apart, and eventually it's your liver, and you can only get that next fix at greater and greater cost. And so now to extend the metaphor to our system, we've gotten all the easy oil, we've depleted all the easy resources and the ones that we can easily escape the consequences of. Up until now, or up until recently, if you're creating industrial pollution, radioactive waste, et cetera, social turmoil, well, you can move away from it. You can move to a gated community. You can escape it. But today, that's becoming impossible. The consequences are invading even the fortresses of the wealthy in various forms. And if we want to keep growth going, there's not that much more of nature that we can convert into product, and not much more human relationship that we can convert into services. And what we can convert comes at much, much higher cost. You have to excavate the Albertan tar sands and devastate vast ecosystems. You have to clear cut the forests a fifth time or a sixth time, and they're not really recovering anymore. Trees are dying everywhere, and the planet just can't take that much more of that. And then the other thing, sometimes economists will say, well, we can grow the economy of services instead, and we can actually have economic growth with less energy. because of miniaturization and other technological innovations. So energy really isn't a constraint. And I think that to meet that objection, you have to kind of extend the peak argument to include community as well, and understand that a lot of the growth in services has come at the expense of things that people once did for each other. And that technology, just like in the material realm, in the social realm, technology has extended the reach of monetized services. So, for example, people never used to pay for communication, but now we pay for almost all of our communication. People never used to pay for entertainment, but now we pay for almost all of our entertainment. Even when my father was a child, he says that in his suburban neighborhood, the whole neighborhood every Sunday would get together with guitars and sing folk songs. Like, to imagine that happening in my neighborhood today is just ridiculous, because we all buy all of our entertainment. But there's almost nothing that we don't pay for anymore. So what's happening is that there's just not that much room for economic growth. We're never going to go back to the normal of the 50s and 60s when, like, there were years where there was like 7 or 8% GDP growth. No way. Now we're having trouble getting up to 2.5%. And that is just not enough to allow lending. The banks would rather just sit on their money. Why would you want to lend it to build a widget factory when the market for widgets is flat, So the money is stagnating. It's as excess reserves, no matter, like you said, no matter how much they create. It's, as Keynes said, it's like loosening your belt and hope you'll get fat.
Well, it's interesting to me that the period of time during which everybody who's in a position of leadership today grew up was one of the more extraordinary economic periods of history where somehow in the decoupling of gold from the international exchange system in 1971 through to current roughly about 2008 when it broke apart, but up to, let's say, between 71 and 2008, we were increasing debt much, much faster than GDP, and that's even ignoring how all the ways I think GDP as a number has been fictitiously padded and otherwise fuzzified. So we have, even by our own data, such as it is, this idea that we can compound our debts faster than we can compound the underlying economy in perpetuity. And that's sort of the environment in which, that's the culture in which the people who are currently in power grew up. So that's normal to them. This very distorted, grotesque, Dali-esque landscape to them looks perfectly reasonable and square and flat. And it's not. It's actually a very unusual period of history, and that's coming to an end. And there are really only a couple ways to end it. This is debt we're talking about. So you pay it back or you don't. And if you don't pay it back, you're defaulting on it in some form, with inflating or printing it away being a form of soft default that just spreads the losses over everybody instead of a few. So that's our choice at this point in time. And if we go the pay it back route, we have to accept a much, much lower standard of living than we've come to expect. That whole born on third base and think you hit a triple thing. Right? We've come to expect that this is just how life is. Well, no, that's how it is when you're spending beyond your means. Spending beyond your means is really not a very normal place to live forever.
Well, the third solution would be to grow the economy so much that you can keep paying it back and have an increasing standard of living. But that's one thing I really appreciate about your financial commentary, that you're one of the few out there really that has integrated the understanding of the limits of growth into this money picture. That's the only way out, and that's not a way out anymore.
Well, we have enough years under our belt at this point to say it hasn't been working for at least 3 or 4 years. And you're right. There's precious little commentary and connection out there that says, wait a minute, maybe it's more than the debt overhang. Maybe there's some other factors at play here. How about this $100 oil? Anybody thinking about that right now? We've never had a single instance of economic recovery with oil prices at this level. It hasn't ever happened. So how it'll be different this time is a mystery.
Yeah. Well, we all know that it won't be, and it really is hard to know what's coming. You'd asked before about how do we grapple with this as individuals when we see the world falling apart. The understanding that the world is falling apart hasn't reached everybody yet. It's still possible today to cling to the illusion that things are basically normal or that normal's coming back, but more and more people are realizing that it isn't coming back. And then the question is, well, what do you do with that? I was at a conference a while back. It was for some strange reason, which I don't understand. I was invited to speak to a group of investors,
Mm-hmm.
and the guy before me, he spoke on how the financial system is going to collapse, so you better buy gold, he said, and it better be physical gold, like actual bars of gold. That's the only safe investment. So then I gave my talk after that, and someone in the Q&A asked me, well, what do you think about gold, Charles? Do you agree with that? And I said, if things fall apart to the extent that the U.S. dollar no longer has any value, the worst investment you could have, the worst thing you could have would be a whole lot of gold in your basement. Because men with guns will come and take your gold. Those men with guns will probably be the government, but could be warlords, thugs, thieves, and so forth. Unless your temperament is cut out to be a warlord and hire your own private army to protect your gold in your basement, and then deal with the fact that they're probably going to think, well, why don't we just take his gold? Unless you're cut out to be a warlord, gold is probably the least safe investment you could have under those kind of conditions. And the only thing that you could invest in that could survive such a transition would be to invest in your community, to create a reservoir of gratitude out there, to be someone who's valuable to other people, who has valuable resources, valuable skills, which you share. Basically, the only kind of wealth that can persist through this transition is what you give. Wealth would be how much you've given. And this shift, this different approach, also resonates with where we want to go anyway. Even when people achieve a lot of wealth and they've kind of won this war of all against all that's dictated by the money system, what do they want to do? They want to give. It's in our nature to want to give. And I think on a deep level, what we're seeing is a resurfacing of a much more ancient kind of economy. All ancient economies were gift economies, where indeed the wealthiest person was the one who gave the most. That's how you became a big man,
Mm-hmm.
potlatch society. And so our desire, and even on a deeper level, it goes down to understanding that we're not these separate beings in an objective Cartesian Newtonian universe, but that something of you is in me, and that our beingness is interdependent.
Well, this is something that I think in the United States is a particular challenge. So I have the opportunity and the fortune to be able to travel and see other cultures and do things. And we United States, have a particularly isolationist sort of a view, and it's heavily reinforced in our practices here, whether it's creating false dichotomies and a political divide so that we can't get along there, or through any of their isms or divisions or whatnot. But it really struck me. I was talking with a woman who was a psychiatrist in one of the tonier zip codes in California, and she said that it was her experience that her practice was actually booming. She has all these people who are hanging on by their economic fingernails, but there's still 2 cars in the driveway, the lawn is perfectly manicured, everything looks great. But the people who are coming to her, they can't even talk about their difficulties with their own family members sometimes, or certainly they can't let their neighbors know. There's like this extraordinary pressure to just sort of deal with it as their world is collapsing around them. And in fact, that is, historically speaking, a really, really unusual condition to find yourself in, and I would suggest it's unnatural.
Yeah. This alienation from everything, first from community, and now from even the family. It's truly remarkable that now like a confidant, like wise advice, that's something that has been commodified. You pay for that today, and you don't get it from the people who are most intimately involved. I mean, this is kind of an extreme, but still, I think it's symptomatic. Yeah,
it's something I've become aware of a lot recently, is that on some level, almost everybody I talk to has got the awareness that something's wrong, maybe desperately wrong. Some of them have the intellectual framework, some just have a raw feeling in their gut. And that something in our narrative that we've agreed to live by is just broken. And I'm not just referring to the American narrative anymore at this point, or European or Japanese. I mean the human global narrative. I mentioned it before. The data suggests, we're past the carrying capacity of the globe. What this means to me is that there needs to be, if you say you're past the carrying capacity, next sentence is, well, I guess there's going to be fewer humans at some point in the future. Or we're going to have to really enormously change our habits and practices. Yet the deepest messages we're still giving to ourselves every day in the newspapers and on TV and in the media and whatnot, in our religious texts are things like, well, be fruitful and multiply. Our economy needs to grow this year and next year and every year forever. That resources are there to be consumed.
Yeah.
And none of these things are truly sustainable, meaning they can continue at their current trajectories for even another 10 generations. Whether it's this year or in 100 years, though, the final consumption of a non-renewable natural resource is it. That's it. It's gone. So are we not also wired somehow as humans to really care about our children? I mean, really, and those who come after us, even if we don't know them? Is not stewardship somehow a human capability?
I think we're caught in the grips of a myth or a story, and you put your finger on it, the be fruitful and multiply. I call that myth ascent. That says basically that we were once very few on Earth, basically animals, helpless and ignorant. Then we developed, thanks to our big brains, science and technology, and we covered the Earth. We transcended natural limitations. We harnessed natural forces. We turned the whole world into ours. We domesticated it. And the story says someday our conquest of nature will be complete. We'll have synthetic food. We'll upload our consciousness into computers. We'll conquer all disease. We'll conquer old age. We'll move on into space, and we won't need nature anymore. We'll have completely transcended it and fulfilled our destiny. And that narrative, it is all over the place in very subtle ways. We don't explicitly talk about conquering nature very much anymore, but the very fact that we refer to nature as resources also comes from that mindset. And that is becoming obsolete in so many ways. The money system is part of that myth. It embodies it and it enforces it. For one thing, because it necessitates, compels economic growth, the conversion of nature into property, into goods and services. And so the breakdown of the money system is one symptom that this myth or this story has run its course. Other symptoms are the outbreak of all kinds of incurable diseases. In the 50s and 60s, it looked like we really would conquer all disease by the year 2000. Mm-hmm. It looked like we had just conquered smallpox and cholera and plague and polio and everything, and cancer was going to be next. But now we have all these new diseases. Life expectancy is starting to go down. And so you look at any institution, it's facing a parallel crisis. And our trajectory of ascent is slowing down or maybe even beginning to descend. Now, will that descent be a crash, or will we level off into some kind of steady state? That's an open question. But I think that if you look at the growth trajectory of natural systems like immature ecosystems or children, you have a period of rapid growth and then it levels off. So one way I like to frame it is I like to say, okay, maybe what's happening is that humanity is entering its adulthood. We've been children this whole time on Earth with a relationship to the planet of mostly receiving, which is the same relationship a child has to the parent. But when you enter adulthood, then your love relationship takes on a new dimension. You fall in love with somebody who's not your parent, and you no longer simply desire to receive, but you also desire to give a gift to your sweetie, and then at some point you desire to co-create. And I think that humanity is transitioning into that relationship to Earth, which means that we're falling in love with Earth. And I think it started as a mass consciousness movement in civilized society. Indigenous cultures are another matter entirely, but it started maybe in the 60s with the environmental movement, and when the astronauts brought back those photographs of Earth, the first pictures anyone had ever seen that didn't have borders drawn on them, the first maps that didn't have borders drawn on them. And people really were struck by those images, and they fell in love with Earth, and the environmental movement was born. And so the problem that we have is that all of our institutions are still based in an obsolete myth, in the era of growth, of conquest, of ascent. But our desires and our intuitions are shifting. We no longer are excited, as we were 100 years ago, to contribute to the conquest of nature. An idealistic young person 100 years ago, I'm going to invent a way to cut down trees faster, and you'd be a hero for doing that. Mm-hmm. But today, the idealistic young people, they're going into permaculture. But the money system is still based in the past. You can still make lots of money if you can discover a way to cut down trees faster, but there's not a lot of money in permaculture. And that means that the money system is obsolete, and we need to change it to align it with a steady state or degrowth economy. And that's what I write about. But basically, none of the policies that are on the table, as far as legitimate political discussion go, nothing's on the table yet. It's still way off in left field.
This breakdown is, I've noticed it as at first I was thinking of it as a cultural, but then I realized there is actually a generational breakdown happening. It first became startling to me about 4 years ago or 5 years ago when I was lecturing. The audience would be exclusively boomers unless they accidentally dragged somebody young along. And then over time it began to shift a little to younger and younger people. But the dichotomy that existed was that the boomers were typically asking me a flavor of this question, almost invariably, which is, how can we preserve the status quo? And the questions would be framed in terms of, who do we vote for so that we can keep this thing moving, or where do I put my 401k, or some version of like, listen, I invested my whole life into this thing. Can it please just not fall apart right now? Thanks.
Yeah.
And young people were peering into the same system and saying, I see nothing to gain by preserving the status quo. You racked up all the debts, and I'm being left with all the wreckage from it. I'm not playing along. So off they go into permaculture or something like that. So there's a real generational gap here. That idea of separation is alive and well, I think, across the ages. And I love this idea that humans were in some sort of a point of initiation, one of those magic boundaries in life where if you had an intact culture, you would have somebody to walk you into manhood from boyhood, or into womanhood from girlhood. And here we are at our adolescence, and I really truly believe that it's up to us to decide either to shift our culture on our own terms, or nature will shift it for us on her terms. We face a future shaped by disaster or design. I'm a design guy. I think design would be awesome if we could do that here. And the trajectory I see, though, is that we are really still very, very clearly headed towards a hard landing at this point. Largely because it's so hard to shift a culture, so hard for the status quo to let go of what it knows how to do. The institutional inertia, the personal inertia, all those things are still really much in play. But I know that any of these big changes we're talking about that we need to have, so if we're going to be living as a part of, not a part from nature, that we're going to be living in balance in a way that we could see credibly could be sustained for another 1,000 years. If we're going to really maneuver into that landscape, that first step for me was required for me to break from the culture. And I, in my own small way, I did this, right, along with my family. I left the comforts of the life I'd lived into, the vice presidency, the big salary, nice, tidy bedroom community, actively crossed the grain of my culture, and I did all these different things, very bold. Yet, as anybody who's read Ishmael by Daniel Quinn, and I think everybody should, that's a great book, he says that Mother Culture whispers to us so seductively and so comprehensively at all moments that it takes near superhuman effort to step back and even recognize what the messages are. So my big break from culture was really nothing more than a series of actually very minuscule steps. And yet we have to take those steps if we're going to close that gap between what we know to be true and what our actions are at this point.
Yeah. I'm kind of a disaster and design guy. The designs are coming out. Like, some of them are in my book. Very few of them are original, actually. I pull them from various traditions of economic thought, and there's tons of solutions out there for every single problem that we face. And they're not actually that hard to implement theoretically, but it's just a matter of the inertia of our perceptions and our habits, our ways of being. And how do those change? Those, personally, I don't usually change anything in my life until there's some kind of crisis or disaster. It's actually not that I made any superhuman efforts to change. It was that I clung on to normal as long as I could until various events made that impossible. And I think on a collective level, we're going through that. You mentioned initiation. I think that's the other thing that happens when one enters adulthood. If you go through an initiation where the world falls apart and even your identity falls apart. And again, like you were saying, primitive tribes, they had these initiation ordeals where they would purposefully make your world fall apart. So everything that had seemed so secure and so permanent and so real became revealed as nothing but illusion, which I think is a really good metaphor for what's happening today with the money system. The things that seem so real. I mean, nothing was more practical than a blue chip stock or a AAA bond. These things. That's how you did it. You bought your annuities. Your insurance. Your long-term investments, and that was security. That was the very essence of practical, of real. But now we're seeing that these things are just numbers in computers. They're just this swirl of bits. And people are almost having a sense of vertigo when they contemplate that all of this could dissolve. So I think it really is and that's just the financial aspect of this. It really is an ordeal. And, you could call it a hard landing. And I think it will be frightening for a lot of people. But fundamentally, we still live on a very rich planet with incredible abundance. And you see it even here in Harrisburg when I live here in Pennsylvania, and last year the Susquehanna River rose 30 feet. And neighbors who didn't even know each other's names were basically flooded out of their houses, and they just started helping each other. And they were able to achieve things that would have seemed impossible a few days before. So I think that our capacities are kind of dormant right now. But when a crisis hits, we'll become capable, like all the things that are politically impossible today. I mean, if we really turned our minds to it, we could achieve them very quickly. We could reduce, if we really had our minds set on it, we could reduce CO2 emissions by 90% in 10 years. Most of them aren't going toward anything that serves real human happiness anyway. We wouldn't be worse off. People in India aren't less happy than people here, even if their ecological footprint is a 10th or a 20th. I was doing some research into organic agriculture. Usually it's criticized as well. It's kind of this, bourgeois indulgence, but you couldn't feed the world on it because the yields are much lower. Turns out that actually the yields are much higher per unit of land, but not per unit of labor.
Mm-hmm.
Per unit of labor, the yields are much lower. So we'd have to have lots more people having gardens and working on farms. But that's where people want to go anyway. So I just increasingly, when I look into it, I get the feeling that this scarcity is an illusion. But it's also a very, if you could say, a very real illusion because it's built into the money system. But it doesn't have to be that way.
So here we are. We've got this idea that there are these big changes coming, whether our money system was due for a breakdown anyway because we've just been, putting too much gas into the engine too quickly for too long, or whether we note that, we're at the carrying capacity of the planet, or whether we note that, there's certain ecological limits that we seem to be hitting, or whether we just note that it's time for us to settle into the idea that we've pretty much conquered the globe and it's time to shift into that next stage of whatever our existence is going to be. Somehow we come to the idea that there are these big changes coming. And I was really taken, I just read an article, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months ago that noted that When the USSR collapsed, alcoholism became the number one cause of death for people between the ages of 18 and 52. 18 and 54, because the number was 52% of all deaths that were recorded were alcohol related. And so here's an example where we have a major economic superpower fell apart, right? And still hugely endowed with all kinds of resources, natural resources as well, oil, gas, all that. But not the least of which is people still had their government housing, and for the most part there was still government supplied food. So they had a place to live, they had food, they had the basics. So, but there was this narrative running for the people there, which was, I'm a pipe fitter, or whatever I do. I'm a pipe fitter, and that job is no longer available. I am now useless. I'm going to numb myself and drink. So it wasn't the economic collapse that really hurt the people there as much as it was their response to it. It was the idea that I have a story running that I am a pipe fitter and I can't do that. I have nothing else to do. My purpose was embedded in that. And if you had a different story that says, wow, I'm out of work. Look at all this free time I have. Here's this huge list of things I've always wanted to do in my free time, and I'm going to grow as an individual extraordinarily in this period and take this as a gift. That's a different story from saying I'm useless, I'm going to drink myself to death. And fundamentally, it's the story we're carrying, not the circumstances, that really dictate our experience of the time. So now I want to sort of turn to the idea, if however we've come to the idea that there's this big set of changes, possibly disruptive, possibly with things like scarcity and lack and other sort of scary things built into it. Possibly we're excited by all the changes that are coming. However we see these changes coming, the question is, what can we be doing today, what should we be doing today in this moment to be, in essence, preparing ourselves internally for living into that new future, whatever it happens to be?
Yeah, I think that it really is the story that we're carrying, and the perceptions that we take into these changes. You know, I mentioned that the really deep story underlying all of this is the story of separation. That, you know, the story that answers the question, who am I and why am I here? The old story was, who are you is a skin-encapsulated soul, you know, a Cartesian mode of consciousness in a robot made of flesh, and you're in this objective universe that operates by force, and the purpose for your being here, well, there isn't one, but you're programmed by your genes to survive and maximize reproductive self-interest. And that was the story of self. And we're learning now that, that story is falling apart in so many ways. It's falling apart scientifically. It doesn't align with quantum mechanics, the observer, the subject-object distinction breaking down. It doesn't align with ecology, doesn't align with new genetics, doesn't align with psychology, the new spirituality, and some of the new paradigms of economics. That self and all that's built upon it is breaking down. And so the new story of self, I think really the answer to your question is that we need to align ourselves with the new story of self, which I would say you could call it the connected self, that says we're not these separate beings, but there's something of you in me. You could even say that we're the same being, you know, looking out at the world through different sets of eyes. And it's not just that we're interdependent. That's one word for it. But it's that my very being depends on the being of other beings. It's something that you can feel, you know, when you read about a species going extinct, you know, or you see the bulldozers knocking down swaths of virgin forest, or you read about a child in Haiti eating dirt because he's so hungry. It hurts. Why should that hurt? From the perspective of separation, it's irrational for it to hurt. It's happening to somebody else. In fact, it's good because that's one less competitor. But the fact that it hurts, I think, hints at our true nature, which, you know, as connected beings, which is really what mystics and spiritual teachers have been telling us for thousands of years. You know, that as you do unto the other, so are you doing unto yourself. You could say that the expansion of self to include others is almost the definition of love. And I think that any way that we can align ourselves with that truth will help us in the transition and help society through the transition too. You know, sometimes, like a lot of people I speak to, almost anyone in the audience will raise their every time I speak, someone will ask the question, well, what about all of those people driving around in their SUVs who just don't get it? How can we make them get it? I think that most of the ways that we try to make them get it are counterproductive. Most of the ways are through guilt or shame. How could you be using up more than your share of resources? But really, to change people and to bring them into a new story, you have to puncture the bubble of the old story. Love is antithetical to the story of separation. It doesn't make sense. It does not compute. I think about that Secret Santa last Christmas who went around to the Kmarts and paid down people's layaways,
Yep.
Someone goes in there and like, oh, someone has already paid this for you. Like, that just doesn't fit in. No one is getting an advantage over you by doing that. There's no strings attached. And it just makes the story of separation, the story of everyone is in it for themselves, everyone is trying to maximize their financial self-interest. I mean, this is an explicit ideology in economics. It makes that story a bit less compelling. And anything that we do to generalize that, anything that we do that increases the amount of love in the world, it makes the story of separation less compelling, and it eases the transition for the entire civilization. And that's not to say that political action and various kinds of activism aren't necessary too. But really what I'm saying is that even these small personal acts are also political acts. They're part of this transition into the connected self and a civilization built on that self. It goes deep. I mean, it sounds like, hey, I'm supposed to be talking about economics here. But I think we have to go all the way to the bottom because economics, as we know it, are built on a deep, deep structure. Plus, I think we understand that everything is changing. We have an intuition that the crisis is a spiritual crisis as well as an economic crisis, a political crisis, an energy crisis, and so forth.
Well, the gift of any crisis is the opportunity to work with whatever comes up and what's been revealed. And this idea of separation is certainly going to be revealed as something that is really the source of a lot of suffering. When I work with individuals, I'm very cognizant of the idea that when I first had this worldview of mine shaken up, when everything was fine and hunky-dory and I had the entire illusion, and then I discovered some information and it shook everything to its core and led to extraordinary changes in my life, I'm sensitive and very empathetic to the idea that those first few months were rough for me personally. I was like, very, very much a lot of anxiety and fear. And so I recognize the stage people will not always, but sometimes quite often go through. And that first stage is, how do I protect myself? And it's very natural. It's like, everything just got shooken up. Let me make sure I've got shelter, food, warmth. And you do that. And then after a little bit of time, you poke your head up and you go, okay, I have that. And the world's still spinning. So now what? And that's where we go to part two of this story, which is to say, well, it's really, we're going to need community, which is a shorthand way of saying, I think, what you're saying, which is that it's time to step into the idea that we're going to be doing as well as our neighbors and vice versa. And that brings us closer to this idea that we're in this together. And then maybe it extends even further out of humans into the rest of the biosphere. And we say, well, actually I'm doing as well as my watershed is doing, and the soil on my property is doing, and the depth of the other connections that are out there around me in the ecological sphere. So those all, and we have our warning signs. The frogs disappearing and being born with 3 legs tells us maybe there's not all's cool with the chemicals we're putting into the environment. But through this, I think we come to this point of, I hope we can get to this point of understanding that we need to start understanding that the old way of doing things is really fundamentally not serving us anymore in total. And that it's a crisis is a great time to pick up the pieces of your life and look at it and say, this isn't serving me, neither is that. Oh, this still works. I'll keep this. And I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to keep these 4 things. And it's time to say what works, what doesn't. But first you have to get to that point of saying, what we're doing isn't working. And that's the first stage of the conversation, I think. Yeah,
and it sure helps to realize that it's not working when the crises begin to come home and you actually start seeing those 3-legged frogs. Today, like you said, our well-being is only as good as that of the watershed, that we live in. But today, money, as we know it, contradicts that. Money says, it doesn't matter what's happening to the watershed as long as you have enough money to, buy organic food shipped in from somewhere else, or to buy water or to move away, like money can insulate you from what's happening to the earth. And you can make money, in fact, by destroying the watershed. So I think that at least part of what I'm working toward is to realign the money system so that's no longer true. So one way to look at that is to, that we need to internalize these external costs. The business model of I get the profits and somebody else pays the costs. Even if you're a wholehearted believer in capitalism, that's not fair. You should have to pay the costs, and not the people downwind, downstream, or in future generations. So I don't know. I guess I just mentioned that because I want to short circuit the conclusion that what we should really pay attention to is just the spiritual aspect. I think that in itself, the idea that the world is divided into two parts, spiritual and material, is itself a very toxic idea, and it's an example of separation. So we definitely need to implement the spiritual or ecological understandings in every way, including in an economic, monetary way. And I'm glad to see that people are beginning to discuss these ideas more and more, even in the mainstream. But there's still a long way to go.
Well, my great source of hope is that the people I find having these conversations most deeply are younger, on average. And they've really, as with bright, facile, energetic minds and a real compelling interest in the future, have looked into things and said, we really have to do things really differently. And there's enough of them have evolved far enough that they can look at the pure consumptive economy and say, that's just that looks soulless to me. I'm not interested. And maybe I'm just in a hotbed of where this is happening, but I see it a lot, and I'm very excited by it because there's a clear. Some of these kids are thinking thoughts that would have been unimaginable to me to be having at 17, 18, 19, 20 years of age.
Yeah, tell me about it. I run into that all the time too. It's like nobody was having those thoughts when I was 20.
Yeah.
Imagine what thoughts they're going to have when they're, in their 40s. I
know. So it's incredible. So I take great hope from that. And when we talk about this idea of building community, I've come around to the idea that I'm not going to hold any more workshops on how to build community because it's not an event. It's a process, and you build community every time you have an interaction with somebody. So all I actually care about are the actions that bring us back together, whether it's the guitar playing that you talked about from your father's age or anything else that we might do sort of in community. And that's one of the things I see young people doing a lot of is actually, finding ways to interact with each other a lot and doing fun stuff, cool stuff, interesting stuff, permaculture things, nature walks, whatever they happen to be doing. But I see a lot of it. And to me, that is when I say, how do we live? That's it right there. Those are the things we need to start doing. It's not something to buy. It's not the next thing to read or anything. Is to literally get out of your house and go find somebody to do something with, and it could be anything, literally anything. I think those are some first steps that make a lot of sense to me right now.
The things that really build community, I think, are things where you're not just consuming together. I've seen a lot of attempts to build community or to create community fail because people don't need each other and aren't giving each other anything, but they're just getting together and consuming drink, consuming entertainment, consuming food, but they're not co-creating, and they're not creating ties that you have in, say, in Pennsylvania in an Amish community where you really need the other people in that community. You can't just delete them from your friends list and pay for the things that they were once giving you. But there's an actual dependency, which we aspire. When people aspire to financial independence, they're aspiring to not need anybody. And I think that community is impossible when we don't need each other. And that community, in fact, is woven from gifts. When you give somebody something, then it creates a tie. That person wants to give you something too. So there's an ongoing relationship which is not present in a financial transaction. And that's why I say that economic growth has happened through the strip mining of community. the conversion of these bonds into, free chemical energy kind of into money. And that's starting to reverse, as you say, with the young people. A lot of what's going on is they could be paying for entertainment, but they're getting together and making films, putting them on YouTube, or they're doing reskilling kinds of workshops. They're teaching each other new skills. They're doing things. They're reclaiming things from the money economy. And I think that it's really interesting that any time you find a way to replace money transactions with self-sufficient or gift transactions, like if you make a neighborhood child care co-op or some kind of way to share things in the community, zip cars in Baltimore, anything that reclaims these paid services, you're actually reducing GDP by doing that, and thereby hastening the financial crisis, because it just intensifies when there's no new goods and services, and in fact the economy is shrinking. All of even Craigslist, by one estimate, it's so far replaced something like $100 billion in ad revenue. That all comes off of GDP too, and so or open source software. So all of these, so they're not all on a community level. Some of them are more on a global level, but all of these are ways of reclaiming the commons and reclaiming relationships, and so they hasten the demise of the financial system, but they also mitigate the severity of the collapse, because now we have some wealth that hasn't been incinerated, or when you reclaim nature when you protect it from development, or stop a pipeline, or do anything to prevent something from being converted into a product, then you're also hastening the collapse. In a way, the conservatives have it right. Shutting off the oil development in the Alaskan Wildlife Refuge does hurt GDP, and it does cause fewer jobs to be created. But that's good, because if we can preserve some biodiversity and some habitat and some of the wealth of Earth, then it'll be much easier to rebuild after the collapse, and we won't have to have a really hard landing with billions of casualties. There's still a lot of richness left, I think.
Oh, there's so much, and I love this. This is very good practical advice. How do we live into this? You go out and find something that would have taken money before and do it without money. So in entertainment, hold a book club. Everybody gets the book, right? Go to the library and get the book if you want to spend no money, and then talk about it. Hold a salon on a set of topics. Figure out how to do the child care collective you talked about, or whatever this thing happens to be. You're building community. You're getting resilience. You're forming those threads with each other. Gift things if you can. Along the way, what's happening subtly is that we're rewriting the narrative of who we are and how we are, and taking it away, reclaiming it, if you will, from the main narrative, which says you are a device that needs to accumulate as much wealth as you can, and if you do that, you'll be really happy, and if you fail at that, you'll be miserable, and stripping it of some of its power, which is an important thing to do here.
Yeah. When you're embedded in a gift community, then it's just insanity to think that more for me is less for you. In a gift community, if somebody has some great talent or some great success or some good fortune, that's good for you too, because they're contributing to your life. Mm-hmm. And it's just much easier to understand that we're not these separate beings in a hostile universe.
Oh, how comforting that would be. Well, listen, this has been a fabulous conversation. We've been talking with Charles Eisenstein, author of 2 books. The Ascent of Humanity is the newest one, and also Sacred Economics, both excellent books. I'm not all the way through Ascent of Humanity yet, but the introduction and first couple chapters, fantastic.
Sacred Economics is the most recent one, actually.
Oh, sorry. Sacred Economics being the most recent one. Okay, so Charles, how can people find out more about you and follow your work and get these books?
Well, I think the best way is charleseisenstein.net has links to my other sites. And I will mention that the text of both books is online as well as in print. Mm-hmm. So, if you are practicing a radical reduction of money in your life, you need not buy the books. Most people do anyway, but you never know.
Okay. I like that model. It's been, I hope it's working for you. It's worked for other people I know. So, fantastic. And, well, thank you so much for spending time to talk with us. I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
This concludes this podcast by Chris Martenson. To gain further insight into where things stand today and what might happen tomorrow, please visit chrismartenson.com. That's ChrisMartenson.com. Please join Chris Martenson next time to continue your journey toward awareness, understanding, and action.